Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today I'd like to talk kind of in depth about an album I've touched on in the past, that being Brian Wilson's 2015 release, No Pier Pressure. This album was released April 17th, 2015 and came in both a standard 13-track edition and a deluxe 16-track edition, which in many parts of the world also included 2 bonus tracks, a reworked version of In the Back of My Mind from 1975, which is great, and we'd heard a lot about it, finally got released here, and a version of Love and Mercy that was originally released as part of the 2005 single Walking Down the Path of Life. I have to say one of my least favorite trends over the last 15 to 20 years has been this tendency to release an album with a slightly different track lineup depending on when and where you buy it. You get the standard edition, then you might get a different edition at Best Buy and a different edition from that at iTunes. Later on they'll release a deluxe edition with some additional tracks. You get different tracks in different parts of the world. It all seems designed to do nothing more than make the fan buy the album over and over again. This isn't the first time Brian Wilson has done this with No Peer Pressure. It happened, of course, on Lucky Old Son, Songs in the Key of Disney, and elsewhere. Much worse offender in my eyes is Paul McCartney. I mentioned in the past that I have been a Beach Boy completist since 1980. Well, actually, I've been a Beatles completist since 1976. And as I'm recording this in March of 2021, for the first time, I have not bought the new Paul McCartney album, McCartney 3. I feel confident that there's going to be a deluxe edition of McCartney 3 coming out in probably the late spring or summer with 4 additional tracks, and I just have to buy the album again, so I'm going to wait. This happened in 2005 with Chaos and Creation in the Backyard. It happened again in 2007 with Memory Almost Full. It's continued to happen every time since then. I've been burned plenty of times. I'm going to wait on McCartney 3. This makes it the first time since 1973's Band on the Run that I haven't bought a new Paul McCartney album immediately upon its release. McCartney 3 has already been released in a bewildering set of overpriced merchandise with different colors of vinyl and so on. I really find this abusive to fans, and like the McCartney camp thinks that every hardcore fan has $8,000 to shell out every time Paul McCartney makes an album. And if there's no deluxe edition in a few months, well, I'll just buy McCartney 3. But I've been burned plenty of times over the last 15 years or so. I am not going to shell out for McCartney 3 again just to buy it 6 months later with 4 additional tracks on it. End of rant, and let's get back to talking about something much more happy, which is Brian Wilson's album, No Peer Pressure. Actually, the initial impression that this album makes in the store is not all that encouraging. You're stuck with a kind of silly punning title, No Peer Pressure, which they've said refers to Brian making the album he wants to make, not succumbing to pressure from other people. But that wouldn't really be peer pressure anyway. I don't think his peers would be pressuring him to do something he doesn't want to do. The cover photo by his daughter Daria Wilson is dark, it's uninviting, it really does not catch your eye. The pun in the title, No Peer Pressure, is driven home with a sledgehammer using a photo from underneath the Santa Monica Pier. It's cool that Brian used a photo taken by a family member, but this photo really does not do the album justice. The track listing on the back of the album shows a distressing number of guest artists. This, to my mind, is not a good sign. You have some very welcome guests like Al Jardine, David Marks, and Blondie Chaplin, but you also have guest artists like She and Him, Peter Hollins, Casey Musgraves, and Nate Russ. These are the kind of guest artists that say to me, this is not a genuine artistic collaboration, more it's a crossover marketing opportunity. Some of the reviews at the time complained that not only were these younger artists there as a crass crossover attempt, they were also there to prop Brian Wilson up vocally, with his voice no longer having the strength or range that it once had. This is an assessment that I strongly disagree with. True, Brian doesn't sing the way he did in 1965. He doesn't sing even the way he did in 1975. But the voice that he's found for himself, I think, is masterful. He sings with assuredness, and he has reached a way of expressing himself emotionally and directly in his voice that he didn't have before. I think the mature Brian Wilson voice is every bit as valid and really, in a lot of ways, more moving than his younger voice. In a way, it reminds me of the artist Henri Matisse. When he got older and could no longer hold a paintbrush properly, he didn't stop creating beautiful work. He moved away from the kind of paintings that he had done as a younger man and instead used scissors to cut out pre-colored paper and continued to create great, beautiful art to the end of his very long life. Brian's voice is certainly different from what it was, but he's learned to sing with an emotional impact that he simply could not have had in his younger years. As to the guest vocals, I don't find them objectionable at all. They're all well done. And Brian has long talked about using the voice as another instrument in his palette of creation, and I think he does very well here. Now maybe I would like to hear a version of this album without the guest artist, with just Brian doing it, but when the guest vocals come in, they're never objectionable, they're always pleasant and enjoyable. Let's talk about the individual tracks, beginning with This Beautiful Day. It's a very short track. Most of the tracks on this album are very short. They leave you wanting more. This is no exception. It's one of the most beautiful things on it. It's a real statement of intent to open the album. Very bittersweet. Bittersweet is the key here on No Pier Pressure. It ends with this long extended chord like Our Prayer or even the Beatles' Day in the Life, and goes on to the second track, Runaway Dancer, featuring Cebu Simonian from Capital Cities. Cebu's voice blends more seamlessly with Brian than some of the other guest vocalists. I think his main contribution here is more as a producer and a writer. Cebu gets a co-writing credit on Runaway Dancer, which apparently began life as a song called Talk of the Town. I think he also contributed quite a bit to the production. This has a more modern backing than a lot of the tracks here, but it's not at all objectionable. It works for a Brian Wilson record. It's not like they're breaking into some techno beats or somebody starts rapping. It's a sound that fits comfortably on a Brian Wilson record. The third track, Whatever Happened To, is the first track on the album to feature former Beach Boys Alan Jardine and David Marks on guitar. Alan's voice is not as featured here as it is later on, but he does add a very beautiful vocal on the You're Not There line in the chorus. Thematically, this song is very close to When I Grew Up to Be a Man, looking back at how life has been and wondering what will be. It's like When I Grew Up to Be a Man, just taken from the perspective of a 70-year-old. Very moving, really one of the highlights of the album. Next up is another co-vocal on the island with She and Him, which features Zooey Deschanel on lead vocal. I have to say, if there's one vocal on this album that I have a problem with, it's Zooey Deschanel's vocal on the island. She and Him are not a bad match for Brian Wilson. They're clearly most interested in 60s and 70s pop. They're one of the few acts that has a higher percentage of their catalog in Christmas records than even the Beach Boys and its members. Every third She and Him album has been a Christmas record, 2 of their 6. But I am predisposed to thinking of successful actors in music as vanity projects. And Zooey Deschanel's vocal seems to me, beautiful as it is, to be affected. It's not that she is singing beautifully, it's that she is acting like she's singing beautifully. Now, that may be some conceit that I'm predisposed to. I find her acting style sometimes good, but I also find her very affected in her acting style where she pops her eyes open and rolls them around like I'm so cute. And I get the same feeling here with her vocal. As I say, it's completely pleasant. It sounds good. It's just I am predisposed to thinking that this is an actress pretending to be a good singer rather than an actress singing well. And let me know what you think about that, whether you feel the same way or whether I just have this predisposition against actors as singers. I don't know. It's a pleasant track. It's kind of silly. There used to be a hamburger chain in the 90s called Islands, which this reminds me of, probably because of the title, On the Island. It had a sort of tropical Caribbean theme with, paper mache parrots and sombreros on the wall and stuff. You felt stupid enjoying it, but it was pleasant and it was tasty. And that's the way I feel about the song On the Island. Next up is an astonishingly beautiful instrumental called Half Moon Bay, featuring trumpeter Mark Isham, who is a real asset whenever he's featured on this album. Brian Wilson instrumentals tend to be highlights. This is no exception. There are some vocals in the background that sort of come in and out, almost like waves on the ocean. It's really, really a beautiful little piece of work. That's followed by Our Special Love, featuring Peter Hollins on vocal. He's a great vocalist. He really sounds fantastic here. And this song features a great, great hook. I just love the bit where they go, except for here, that's where you are. That little bit in the chorus is so, so beautiful to me. Following that, we get The Right Time, which is another feature with Alan Jardine, David Marks on guitar. This features Alan really to good use. And Alan is amazing. His vocal is almost unchanged from the way he sounded in the 60s. And it's a real, real pleasure to hear him everywhere on this album, particularly on this track, The Right Time. This is also a great example of an upbeat tune that does not sound like an 80s sitcom. It's upbeat without being trite. It's optimistic without being silly. It has gravitas to it. It seems genuine. It's a really, really beautiful piece of work. And again, Alan's vocal is a highlight. This is another great, great track on the album. After that, you get Guess You Had to Be There, which is a duet with Kacey Musgraves. Kacey Musgraves, love her vocal on this. I can see how some people might find her vocal a little annoying. I personally love it. I think she's great. She sounds good here. Thematically, this goes back to, Brian talking about his past, the things he's been through, the sort of unusual and bizarre life that he led as being leader of the Beach Boys. Another highlight of the album. The next three tracks are the three tracks that you miss if you get the standard rather than the deluxe edition of No Pier Pressure. The first of those is a song called Don't Worry, which has this sort of 80s trying to sound like the 60s synth horn thing going on in the background, makes it sound kind of like a Wham record. It's probably the worst track on the album. But saying that, as worst tracks go, it's probably the best worst track on a Beach Boy or Brian Wilson album in a very long time. Just everything else on this album is so strong. It's definitely inferior by comparison to some of the other things here, but not a terrible track by any means. The second of the three tracks, Somewhere Quiet, is a vocal rewrite of Summer Means New Love from the Summer Days and Summer Nights album, and features Brian and Al very heavily on vocals. It is beautiful. It's so great to hear Brian and Al's voices together. This is something that you would really miss if you didn't get the deluxe version of the album. This thing is so moving. I really, really love Somewhere Quiet. And that's followed by another pretty decent track, I'm Feeling Sad, which has a sort of simple Brian Wilson lyric with lines like, take a walk to the grocery store, I can't remember what I came for. This is the simple, direct, kind of charming Brian Wilson lyric that we've come to know and love, going at least as far back as Busy Doing Nothing on the Friends album in 1968. This is another thing you'd miss if you got the standard version of the album. Next up is a song called Tell Me Why, which features Alan Jardine's lead vocal on the choruses. And it's just great to have any opportunity to hear Brian and Alan singing together again. We get that opportunity on the next track, which is a real highlight, Sail Away, featuring Brian, Alan, and also, after a 42-year absence since the Holland album, Blondie Chaplin is back, which is really, really welcome. So great to hear Blondie again with Brian and Alan. This song is an homage both to Sail on Sailor, on which Blondie sang lead, and Sloop John B., which is also referenced musically in the opening and in the transitions. Really, it's Alan's vocal that shines here. Blondie is not, unfortunately, used to that great an effect here. It's great to hear him, but Alan is the one that really shines on Sail Away. Blondie is used actually to much, much better effect on the Brian Wilson and Friends Soundstage Special Event live album, which was sort of a promotional thing on PBS for the No Pier Pressure album. You get Blondie not only singing Sail Away here, you get him doing Sail on Sailor, Wild Honey, and I believe there's another one. I'm drawing a blank on it. Somebody let me know. This also features former Beach Boy Ricky Fattar. So at this concert, you get, what, 4 Beach Boys? I don't think David Marks was there. And between Brian, Alan, David, and Blondie, you've got 4 Beach Boys on the No Pier Pressure album. You've got twice the number of Beach Boys on No Pier Pressure that you get at a Beach Boy concert these days. Next up is a song called One Kind of Love, which was written for the film Love and Mercy. And to me, it really references God Only Knows in its use of French horn at the beginning. Also, there's a line about thank God right at the beginning. You really can't help but think of God Only Knows when you hear the opening of One Kind of Love. Incidentally, I know I've talked in the past about how I dislike the Beach Boys referencing their earlier work in their songs, but these are examples of how to do it right. It's subtle, it's an homage, it's not a ripoff. If anything, it builds on what came earlier. It's not just shoehorning lyrics like fun, 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 and excitations in there to remind you you're listening to the once great Beach Boys. This is done in a very, very classy and very artistic way. The next song up is with Nate Ruess from Fun. It's a song called Saturday Night. Again, very worthy track, very enjoyable, using Nate Ruess's very different voice almost as an instrument. Maybe this is a crass crossover marketing opportunity here, but it works, sounds beautiful. And the last track here, appropriately titled The Last Song, is a beautiful, bittersweet closer for the album, kind of like Summer's Gone was for That's Why God Made the Radio. This apparently was supposed to have been a duet with Lana Del Rey, and that fell apart for some reason. And I am so, so glad that it did, because if Brian Wilson ever deserved a solo spotlight, it's here on The Last Song. He's talked about this being his final album. He talked about retiring at the time it came out in 2015. He certainly hasn't retired, but as of now, which is March 2021, this is still his last album. I, of course, hope he'll continue to create a lot more music for a lot of years to come, but if this is indeed the last Brian Wilson album, it's an almost miraculous way to close out a very turbulent career. There's not a bum track on this album, and it has the kind of emotional depth that a younger artist simply could not produce. I am so, so grateful that Brian Wilson was around in 2015 to make the album No Pier Pressure. Once again, we've run long. I hope you found this interesting. I'd love to hear your comments. Please comment. Please subscribe if you haven't. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching. Bye.